around how do we want to, if we choose to regulate these types of facilities here in town. And so this zoning map, and I'll just try to go through it quickly, but this darker red area, this is the general business district. So you got 3 of these, general 1, 2, and 3 general business districts. You got a small one that runs here south on 140, and then this large area of landmass right here is C&I district, and this area over here is also a C&I district. At least in my experience, that's typically where towns have cited these types of locations. So at some point, we need to start to sharpen our pencils and make decisions as to, one, do we want to have these types of facilities in our community? And if we do, where do we want those types of facilities? And so I think, if anything, this is a good starting point to look at this, or to Lauren's point, maybe we consider an overlay district that just locates these in certain areas throughout. But for those of you that weren't familiar with how this map is laid out, that I just showed.
So, and I think it's, oh, go ahead, question, sorry.
Excuse me, while you're there, Mr. Manager, what do you and the board have on the horizon here? We plan on putting this, going forward with this in the November town meeting?
I don't think we have much of a choice because of the moratorium's up. So we have to come up with something by November.
Yeah, the moratorium expires on December 31st, and the hope is to try to regulate time, place, and manner using the November town meeting to do just that. So we're under a tight, I'm happy you asked that question because that's a really important point. It's very constrained as far as time. The planning board has to hold a public hearing, and we did the timeline. Kelly and I worked back with Denise, and we're thinking that the planning board will have to hold a public hearing, I think, by the 3rd week of October. So we're already in the 2nd week of September. So all of this has to go through the planning board by statute. So we really need to work with the planning board and maybe support them and give them good advice and information so that they can go ahead and do the work that's before them.
And we should be clear that, that's why we're having this informational session, is in preparation for the town discussing this at town meeting. Yeah, that would be great. And I know there's some more questions too.
Yeah, Paul Carey, I'm on the planning board, and Derek and the board of selectmen have been talking with us for a while about this. Just for some history, when medical marijuana was passed, the planning board came forward with, at first, a moratorium, just to say, let's take some time and figure out what it was. The town was overwhelmingly against the moratorium on medical marijuana zoning change. And so we had nothing on the books. We came back at the next town meeting and said, we're just going to say medical marijuana can go in this zone and this zone. I think it was C&I and general business. That was overwhelmingly opposed on town floor. Now, this might be very different that it's recreational. So we will be holding a public hearing. There is a draft bylaw that's been circulating. Where it goes, I don't know, but we are going to put something before the town, I think, with either the Board of Selectmen or the Planning Board or something jointly. But this is the first step of it. Besides all the background conversations, to get input from you folks. So we appreciate all the folks that have shown up.
Paul, is there still a question with regard to a no ballot question bailout to begin with?
We haven't been, so I think council talked about some towns have kind of given you an entire menu to vote from. No, only here, or nothing. We haven't decided what we would put forward. I don't think the selectmen have, or the town manager. So it's, if there's input from the town, we'll listen to it.
No, my question was, you have the two-step process. You have a bylaw, and then it has to be ratified by the ballot. Is that process part of your thinking at this point?
That's only for a ban, Paul.
Or
Yeah,
that
I
super
understand
limit,
that.
or like a super limit.
Super limit, okay. Well, just 1 second. This gentleman he's been.
So if we don't, if you have this town meeting in November and nothing passes by 2/3 of the vote, it's going to be pretty much much open season on any business district
Yeah.
to put it in, right?
Well, I don't think it's any business district, I think it's any district. Well, it's arguable, and town council might have a different opinion, but I think, we don't have any regulation on marijuana, recreational or medical right now. And I think town council did a great job of explaining that there's at least an argument that, hey, somebody's gonna come in and say, I can put a grow facility in any agricultural zone because it's agriculture. But there's arguments against that, but right now, we don't have a bylaw.
If we can't pass a 2/3 vote bylaw in the November town meeting, then we'll vote for a moratorium and ideally pass that to buy ourselves until the spring town meeting. And hopefully we can do a better job of making sure we build some consensus among the community to get that 2/3 vote. That's part of why we wanted to do this informational session, was so that we could educate people, make them understand the difference between retail marijuana facilities and cultivation facilities and testing facilities, et cetera. And so that's part of the process. But I think we'll either approve a bylaw in the November town meeting, or we'll ask that a moratorium be approved so that we can have until the spring town meeting to try to get it clarified.
But someone that would want to open a business on January 1st would vote no to both of those.
That's right, yeah, that's right.
And I would add that just because town meeting doesn't votes the moratorium, there's no guarantee that the AG's office would extend that moratorium. Because remember, originally they said we had until December 31st, and they weren't granting moratoriums beyond the 31st. Now, there's still a likelihood that they would grant the extension, but there's no guarantees. And so, I really think we really need to, again, focus our efforts and put forward the best draft possible for town meeting and get that passed, instead of hoping that we have a safety net of a moratorium.
I mean, and I know there's a, go ahead, Chief.
Well, is the board or the planning board planning on putting on a total ban question at the November town meeting as an option also? So having a bylaw, zoning bylaw, a total ban, and a moratorium, so the voters can decide what direction they want to go.
On the planning board, we talked about it, we haven't decided that. We did talk about that, the whole menu.
Yeah. I mean, I think, again, it's up to the planning board. I think we'll talk about it too on the Board of Selectmen. I know my perspective, and this is the first time I've heard of that menu option. I think I think it's good, because I think there's going to be a lot of uncertainty when we come to town meeting. Even though all these folks are here, I hope you all come to town meeting. There's going to be a lot of uncertainty and a lot of debate around what's what. And so I think we have to decide whether or not having multiple options is the way to go, or if we think that's going to create more confusion and we have, a proposal and a moratorium. So I agree with you, Chief. I'm a fan of having a few different options on there, because I think there's some pretty clear options, right? There's retail, there's all other uses, and there's, do you want it in commercial, or do you want to put it in an overlay? I mean, or do you not want it at all, right? There's sort of a few basic options that I think we could clarify for people. But I do think an outright ban, to your point, Chief, like if that's an option, so people should have that.
Well, I think just because the timing is critical, because
Yeah.
you may not get the extension of the moratorium. So
Exactly.
I think you need to give those options.
Yep.
Yeah, and, just to echo those comments, I think that's the same concerns the planning board had, whether it was more beneficial to give the menu, or would it cause more confusion, and you wouldn't get 2/3 on anything.
Yeah, you won't.
That's the tough part.
So one thing that I would just weigh in on this, it's a policy decision how to approach it. But I would really encourage the planning board hearing process to try and vet some of this. So, because town meeting is never the best place to, write bylaws. We know that, right? I remember a few years ago, we were trying to do an exception for a public safety officer with a dog on school property, and it was like we were here for maybe a half an hour or an hour talking about how to define public safety officer. So I encourage people to use that planning board hearing process, to really come and talk about the pros and cons of an all-out ban versus a regulation. And then, hopefully the planning board and the Board of Selectmen can come forward with kind of I know I'm using the word plan several times, but with a plan for what it thinks is the best way to regulate, or what they think is the best way to regulate. And then whether the town meeting chooses, we want to ban it altogether, that's fine, but at least the regulation there's some consensus about, we went to the public hearing, we listened to the people, this is the area where they feel it might be best located, and these are the types of activities we think might make sense.
Council, just one clarification. I know that this has to go through a planning board hearing,
Yes,
but anybody, well, the selectmen can propose a ban.
sure,
A group of citizens can propose a
yes, they
ban.
may.
All it means is it has to go through a planning board hearing, and the planning board can vote up or down. But
Absolutely.
still, if you have enough signatures, it goes to the ballot.
Absolutely, it goes to
Goes to
the
town
want, exactly, yeah.
So it's not
Absolutely.
just if the planning board says we want every kind of marijuana facility, everybody else in town can vote us in.
I agree, and I appreciate that clarification for the group. I guess what my point was, regardless of what winds up being proposed to town meeting, whether it's petition, whether it's board of selectmen, whether it's a planning board, whether it's anybody, the benefit of the planning board hearing on those topics is that all the people that have interest in that can be there and kind of hash it out a little, sorry for the pun, discuss it in more detail. Obviously, here we're talking in hypotheticals, so we can't really get into the nitty-gritty of what a proposed regulatory bylaw would look like. But if you're talking about something real, then there's a discussion. Oh, we think this is a terrible idea in this district planning board. We don't think you should support that, even if it wasn't your original proposal.
Right. But if a group of citizens wanted to get together
Yes.
and put something on the town meeting ballot,
Yep,
the planning board would, no matter how crazy it was,
that's right.
the planning board would have to hold a public hearing on it.
Yes,
And
anytime
then
it's
we'd be asked
zoning,
for our opinion,
that's right.
but that wouldn't control.
Anytime a zoning amendment is proposed, whether it's by the Board of Selectmen or any other board, by an individual who's has the right to make a proposal, or by the number of registered voters needed for that particular meeting, the planning board has to be referred to the planning board, and a public hearing has to be held. And the planning board at that public hearing is going to take a vote on whether to support or not support, and they're going to come to town meeting and make their recommendation. And that's it. And the recommendation can be, we don't recommend that you approve this. We think this is a bad idea, or we think this is a good idea, or we talked about it, we're split, we couldn't come to a decision. But that's the content of the recommendation.
I know there's at least two more questions. I think you've got.
Marcia, did you have a comment?
During the presentation, I thought I heard that moratoriums were being extended through 2019. Is there more detail as to
Sure.
what the requirements are?
Well, we know that the AG has approved some extensions to June of 2019. There's no, right now, the town could vote that, and it would be sent to the Attorney General's office. But a moratorium could be challenged, it could be disapproved by the AG, they could change their standards, and that happens. As we've seen, originally it was December, well, first it was, you have to adopt by April something. Then there was a moratorium, April 2017. Then there was a moratorium that was approved through the end of 2018. And then, as I noted, there's been a few that have been approved through June 30th of 2019. But it also makes the town susceptible to challenge if the town can't demonstrate that an active planning process is going on, because the moratorium itself could be a subject of challenge. So there's real value of considering the options and trying to make something happen, whatever that something might be.
General question, do kids at MS still have to pay money to play sports?
What kids want?
Kids from NIMA, do they have to pay money to play sports?
Are there school athletic fees?
Yes.
I'm going to guess the answer to that is yes.
Yes. It never used to be that way. So in my opinion, this would be a really great way to,
Supplement.
yes, if we could get it all together.
You have two issues here. Because the regional school district is a municipality unto itself. They have their own rules that they operate by, and they're funded by both towns. And this is a totally different issue.
Well, I think the point was that we could allocate funding from revenue associated with
Right.
marijuana facilities to a specific
sports,
use,
there's still
which
some
could
fees,
offset
so
some.
we can figure out a place to do it. It probably benefit everybody.
Tough or not, that was the suggestion. So, Chief, you had a question?
Sorry.
I was going to go into it.
My question is, the planning board going to take the lead on this issue and start drafting some proposed zoning bylaws to move forward? Paul?
I'm sorry, I'm reading my emails.
Is the planning board going to take the lead on this issue and start looking at proposing zoning bylaw changes?
I don't know,
Before
we've been
November.
the last couple, Mike, and right now the selectmen have been great, and the town manager has been great about taking the lead on this one, so
Okay.
we will definitely work with them.
I'm sorry, you had a question way back, I'll come right back.
Yeah, so, do we have, besides that ballot question that was such a close margin, do we have any insight as to the town's position? I think you've done a great job, and thank you for your presentation tonight, of just kind of showing us the tools of kind of how to get to where we may or may not want to go. But it's just kind of, do we have an idea of what direction the town wants to then go in?
Right. I mean, the formal vote at the 2016 state election was the only vote that judges that, or that the legislature used to judge that. I mean, otherwise it would be anecdotal what people expect. It would be the discussion at town meeting on the moratorium.
So there's no like kind of broad, that question didn't specifically ask in your town.
No.
And like you said, so to get additional clarification, are there any sorts of like ways that I'm new to this, but are there any ways that the town can be canvassed, can be surveyed, to kind of get greater insight into which direction people want to go? As opposed to banning versus regulating.
There's nothing
versus...
formal that exists for the town to do that between now and the November special town meeting. There's no state law mechanism to make that happen.
Well, I mean, there's a lot of different strategies we could use, like SurveyMonkey, but, you know, to do outreach and try to engage community.
And this is one of those things.
Exactly.
Right.
And that's why the board wanted to have this evening's meeting. And so we probably have maybe 50 folks here. And that's a challenge, to try to get people to come out to town meeting, to vote at the general election, to participate in government. So, yeah, we're always willing to have those conversations, but I can guarantee you we do the best that we can. If you have suggestions, we're more than happy to take them.
Yeah, no, I was just curious. I think there's a lot of turnout, but I don't know where people stand.
Mike, I'm coming back to what I started to ask a while ago, and it relates to what the chief said. I'm going to have a question on there to ban it completely. You have to have it on the ballot.
So you can do either direction.
Right, but you got a ballot coming up in the beginning of November, and you got 35 days to get that taken care of. So this, I think, is part of the whole way you're thinking. Am I correct?
Well, wouldn't we, if we had a ballot, if we had an article to prohibit, then we would go to ballot in May.
So, yeah, I mean...
But what about the December cutoff point?
So what I would recommend is if you do choose to do a ban, that ban would also include an extension of the moratorium until the earlier of approval of the ballot question, or June 30, 2019. So we would try to build it in, and we'd write the language so that it allowed for that.
So
And then-
I just want to call everybody's attention to what you pointed out very early on, which is that we are a yes town. And I'll be honest, I voted against it, but I really think that we need to look at a way to thoughtfully look at a way we can incorporate it into our town so that we don't run the risk of being sued. We have enough lawsuits where we sort of done what we thought was a good thing to do, and now we're being sued, and now we have out-of-pocket expenses and so forth that we have to be concerned about from a legal standpoint. I think we need to be very careful about, even though we may feel strongly like we don't want it in our town, that we're running the risk of being one of those towns that put the moratorium out there forever, and not just, a temporary one where we figure things out. And then we get sued by a big company, a chain company, that comes in and says, wait a minute, you guys were a yes town, and you work too hard to say no, instead of hard enough to say yes in a small bucket. So I'm just putting that out there. We need to be thoughtful in that way. And I'm afraid that at town meeting, people aren't going to know that, because they're not here.
Aside from the substantive comment about the merits of doing a ban versus regulating, if you were to adopt a ban through adoption of a zoning bylaw and, or a general bylaw and a ballot question. Let's just take a zoning bylaw and a ballot question. I don't think the town would be subject, I mean, anybody can sue a town for anything, as we all know. But I don't think the town would be at risk of a lawsuit that could be successful. If the moratorium was just extended with no work, let's just say we left the night, we didn't do anything else. Someone might challenge the moratorium and say, in effect, this is a ban. And that the only way to do that is with a ballot question. But if you have the ballot question, that is what the law requires, those two steps. So I don't think that a lawsuit would ensue from that. I do, you know, the risk of misregulating or improperly regulating. So we talked about making it improbably impractical or whatever that language was. You know, saying you could do it just in this spot, and you can only do it if you do these bizarre rules that are not applicable to any other businesses. That might expose you to risk. So no matter, as we go forward, I mean, one thing that the town really is very vigilant about is sending all bylaws to council for review. We send back our comments, usually at town meeting. If someone asks my opinion, I explain. If there's risks, we try to highlight those and address them through changes to the bylaw before town meeting votes on it. You know, and again, I think the fact that we've seen so many of these bylaws come by is a good thing, because it means, you know, we have good ideas about the way to streamline things. For example, if you wanted a special permit process, you don't have to repeat everything about your special permit bylaw. You can just reference the special permit process that's already in your bylaw. So we've been working with municipalities on the best way to draft these things. The question, whether to ban, whether to regulate, you know, and if you're going to regulate, how, those are really the big picture issues. And then exactly how to craft it. And that's like, you have to look, you have to think about the local issues and what works best for the town.
Dan, did you look? Yeah, so basically it kind of breaks down just, and this is a question I guess directed to the selectmen, what choices have been considered for thinking as it's coming at us? We've heard the laboratory discussion that's been widely that's shown up on the selectmen's meeting. We clearly have a lot of agricultural land to grow marijuana. There's no question about that. And then, of course, you have retail establishments, which we have very limited infrastructure, buildings for retail, period, in this community. I mean, that's one of the things this community doesn't have. So I guess, what are the selectmen's thoughts about that in terms of, we know we have a lab company coming at us and just showing interest. We're not really a community that has an industrial park that has infrastructure for labs. So I guess what are the thoughts of what's coming toward this and why? I mean, what are the communities in the state are dealing with? So is there any thought? Is there any other things regarding that?
We're still in the beginning phases ourselves.
Yeah.
We've been talking to KP, getting advice. So we still have to draw up zoning bylaws, laws. We kind of really want to know what the citizens want. We all have our own opinions, but if, you know, majority of the town wants X, we're going to go with you guys want personal, our own personal opinions. So.
And I think, go ahead.
So I guess what's the next step? So if citizens of the town want to express their opinion, where's the form?
We're gonna develop some zoning bylaws and we'll have public hearings, and then you guys will be able to have your input there. But the biggest thing will be a town meeting.
Okay.
But I would encourage folks to express their opinions before town meeting, because I mean, we did a bylaw, as I said, with the medical stuff years ago. Nobody showed up at the planning board hearing for that one. Nobody showed up at the planning board hearing for when we were going to zone it in certain places. Town manager with KP developed a draft bylaw earlier this year. We had a public hearing. It was the town manager and the planning board that came in. It was not ready for, you know, to go out to everybody, but we need to get that input before town meeting. The council said you don't want to write a bylaw at town meeting, so let the planning board know, let the town manager know, let the board of selectmen know what you're interested in. The planning board has heard either silence or we don't want that much regulation. So that's what I've heard.
Yeah, so I would echo that, like, we can have hearings and we can schedule things, and I think it's amazing we've got so many people here. There's definitely way more people here than I thought, so that's fantastic. But we need to hear from you, right? So like you can go to the website and you can email me, you can email Gary, you can email Steve. So if the more you, because we have to do what's convenient for everyone else, right? So it's not convenient for everybody to come to a 7 o'clock meeting during the week or whatever. But if you email us, if you get my, you can call us, you can do, I mean, I'll give you my phone number after the meeting, whatever we can do to get input from the community about what your perspective is gonna help us craft something that's more likely to pass on the town hall floor. Our goal is to have something that will pass town hall floor so that we're not left vulnerable by the lack of any bylaw, right? So that's the goal, because it's not gonna be any easier to pass something at the Springtown meeting than it is in November, except then we won't have an option of a 6-month additional moratorium. So, like, time is of the essence. That's a legal term. We have to do this. We have to do this now, so that we can put ourselves in the best position to do what the people in the town want. So, tell us. Most importantly, tell your friends to tell us. Right? There's like 50 people here, but spread the word on Facebook. Talk to your friends. Say, hey, email the selectmen. We went to the meeting. There's a Mendon Upton politics site. I know people don't like putting on Facebook what they think about anything, so it doesn't really work. But you can at least spread the word to have people email us to tell us their opinions, because that's what we need. You know, we talked about doing a survey, to the gentleman's point over there, right? Like, if I had my druthers, I would have a way to, like, do a survey monkey to the entire town, and I don't know how many people would respond, but I'd love to take that back in. And it's not just for this, it's for investment priorities. Do you want more schools? Do you want more roads? Do you want a library? Do you want a DPW? All these things. I wish there was a better way to communicate with the town. I haven't figured out what that is, but for now, email us, call Derek at the town hall. Like, the more feedback we get, the better we'll be able to kind of put something together that people will pass.
Right, I know that Grafton and Sutton have been regularly using social media and survey monkeys to collect information. They're clearly doing it. I mean, it's been a couple of years now.
So we would talk about some ideas so folks can provide input, and
Sorry, what?
we were talking about a few ideas
yeah.
so folks could give feedback. So I think the best thing to do, SurveyMonkey is great. My concern with SurveyMonkey is that we'll have one person sitting in the basement saying prohibit, and we'll have one person who sent in 100 votes, you know?
The survey monkey's got a tool that prevents IP addresses and doing all this stuff. But the technology's there to prevent people.
What the alternative is we could set up a specific email address that folks could just email us directly on their thoughts and ideas. We can incorporate that into the
Like ideas, yeah. Yes, the question in the way back, and then I'll come back. Sir, you had your hand up a long time.
Possibly a theoretical question, but I have to ask. If the genie gets out of the bottle and we all of a sudden end up with pot here in one form or another.
If you end up with what?
If we end up with pot here in Upton.
A retail
Has the
shop?
state,
Are you talking about a retail shop or
in any of its,
a lab or anything? Okay.
has the state allowed in some time for a town, through probably town meeting, a chance to turn things over?
No. No. Once a license has been issued and they demonstrate that they're compliant with zoning, if the zoning were to change later, it would be grandfathered use. That's number one. But number two, they have to meet the licensing requirements. And so if they fail to meet their licensing requirements, then the state license could be revoked. The other thing is, I mentioned briefly, although we didn't talk a lot about it, is that some towns have now been using a local licensing scheme as well to address things like hours of operation and noise levels or odor levels or something like that. And so that could also be adopted as a bylaw authorizing, let's just say, the licensing authority to impose reasonable time, place, and manner restrictions, which as soon as that's authorized, that would exist as a separate scheme, also be able to be enforceable. You couldn't totally reverse it, but yes.
And Council, just for clarification, let's say the moratorium expires, and the next day somebody applies for a license, they're subject to whatever zoning we have then.
That's right.
So if we change the zoning a month later, before their licensing process is over, they're still subject to what we have today.
It depends, right? So if they submit their if they had their 6-month meeting, their community outreach meeting, and they wait stealthily for the moratorium to expire, and they have an HCA and they filed that day, then yes, that's what it would be subject to. But if, if they waited and they didn't file until the zoning bylaw took, let's say something, the town meeting voted and the AG is reviewing, if that had happened, it still would be in effect because it would date back to the date of town meeting. So it would depend on the effective zoning at that time.
Every time you mention local licensing, you say, I think it's time, place, and something else. Are those the only things that a local license can restrict?
Basically, it's time, place, and manner, safety of operation. A lot of these things are regulated by state law. Usually I bring them, I didn't bring them today, but the regulations are like this thick. And you can find those online on the Cannabis Control Commission's website. They're not this thick online. And you can see they really, any number of operational issues are addressed by the state licensing process. However, a town can also have that licensing process, and one of the benefits then is not only is a violation of the local license then a problem for them with the state license, but it could be enforced through non-criminal disposition, which is the issuance of tickets that can be enforced without going to court. So,
But when you say manner, we can impose a safety restriction.
you can do that. Typically, that would be done through through site plan review or a special permit. The state has safety requirements that are mandatory. So the security plan has to be filed with the state. Then that typically would be filed, some version of that would be filed with the town. So the local license could just say they have to comply with their state licensing requirements. So a violation of the state license would be a violation of the local license as
What
well.
if we came up with a safety regulation that's not encompassed in the state safety regulation?
In theory, yes.
We could.
In theory, yeah.
There is a requirement for local review by the police chief as well of the safety plan.
Local review by the police chief. Yeah, in theory, time, place, and manner restrictions can be imposed by a licensing authority. So if there was something the state hadn't addressed that was very important locally, and we were able to demonstrate that there's a reason why that could be, it's reasonable, it's not the most restrictive, et cetera, we could likely impose that kind of a restriction. Yes?
I really hope that we think about using SurveyMonkey, because you can ask specific questions that it's easier to quantify the information coming back, rather than just say, compose an email, and a lot of people don't want to be identified, saying what you think about marijuana. People are going to be intimidated. They won't want to do that. SurveyMonkey will give you specific questions. You can tally up the input, and you can have a better idea as to where people really stand.
One of the problems with, well, we can figure all this out, because I think that's a great idea. I think doing something with SurveyMonkey is great. I don't know how people, can you put a link to a SurveyMonkey, like on the website, so you can direct people there? Okay, so that's good. So we don't need people's email addresses or anything like that. So we should do something like that.
If it
What
fails, it fails, but at least we can try.
Yeah. What other questions do people have?
Actually, tonight's the first time I knew that we were talking to a laboratory about this. Medical laboratories are subject to large number
We're not
of...
talking to a laboratory. They just sent us a letter asking us to come to our town. We haven't voted on anything, we haven't agreed to accept them. It was just a letter that they sent to us.
Okay. Still have a
Basically, we said, we're not going to talk about the lab until after November, and after we find out what the citizens are up to.
They use that particular letter for that, those folks were on the agenda, you didn't get that, correct?
We did talk about, we just said our decision was not to vote on it, but to wait till after November meeting to make a decision of where we would head with that letter.
Still have a question, which is that there are all kinds of regulations on the operation of medical laboratories. Who can dispose of waste, enclosures, things like that. Do all those regulations apply to a medical marijuana laboratory since it's ostensibly medical?
I don't know the exact answer to that, other than to say that the regulations address non-medical marijuana laboratories. The whole idea of these laboratories is to test the marijuana that's going to be sold. And if you're reading in the news about this, that's actually the last piece. There really aren't any. And so they can't really start selling marijuana at retail until the laboratories exist. So I think we'd have to look at the regs. It's possible certain of the state regs about other types of laboratories have been built in, but I don't know exactly.
And just to be clear, if there was ever a point at which we got past just receiving a letter from one of these companies, there's no way we would let them into town without having absolute clarity around, to council's point, around security, disposal, handling, I mean, everything. There's not going to be some, just because they're a lab, they're going to come in and be throwing pot in their dumpster. Like, we'll make sure nothing like that ever.
No, the reason I'm asking is they're just very well-established guidelines for medical laboratories, and very reasonable guidelines, and I didn't know if they applied to
this.
the marijuana laboratories. It would be reasonable that they do, but I just don't know if they do.
Just from what I've seen, is that there's a difference between the medical marijuana testing and the testing of marijuana for recreational, and they're different purpose. So I don't believe that those full medical regulations apply to some of the recreational testing facilities, from what I've seen in practice.
And this is going to be one of those things that may change when DPH transfers regulation of medical to the CCC. The goal is to kind of harmonize the way the two schemes work, but it's not 100% clear. So there's those draft regulations, they just came out on September 6th. They'll definitely get feedback on them from Mike. It's my expectation.
I mean, in that case, you have the building code, the fire code, you have regular regulations, it's regulated substance. You're not going to have some kind of free fall.
No, and part of the licensing process at the state level is to approve a security and safety plan, to dispose of waste, to deal with odor, all that kind of stuff. So when the town is looking at what it wants, if it's going to regulate, it would look to incorporate some of those requirements in what's provided to the planning board, or whatever the special permit granting authority is. The planning board's unlikely to want everything that's filed with the state, but it probably will want some of the things that are filed with the state. That's something that we can look at for in the bylaw. And other communities have been struggling with these very same issues. So there's some good examples around. You know, as I said, the law continues to evolve, and so the ideas about what it makes sense to put in these bylaws continues to evolve. And communities like Upton that have waited out some of this time are going to benefit from the work that other communities have done, and that they can look at them for ideas.
Do we have any studies, or has anyone looked at what's happened in Colorado and California historically, since they're ahead of us on all of this?
The state has.
So
The Cannabis Control Commission has looked at all that. That's one of the first things they did after they were formed, is go to Colorado. Actually, even before they were formed, it used to be under the state treasurer that this process was until they created the Cannabis Control Commission. So under the state treasurer, they had originally, when this petition was circulated, gone out to Colorado. I think they may have gone to a couple other places, Oregon, and met with the local officials, state officials, et cetera. So they have taken part of that learning in the regulations that have been crafted for that very purpose.
Anything else?
Thank you. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.